Well, to quote Bob Fosse's All That Jazz and Roy Scheider, the Joe Gideon character in that same movie, it's showtime. This is Journey of an Aesthete podcast, of course, and I'm your host, Mitch Hampton, and there's a lot to cover in this episode. First of all, is the sound clear? A wonderful producer, Laurie, just does so much. I want to give a lot of thanks to her up front because she just really makes so much of this possible. And just as the kids say, a shout out to her. So this is Journey of an Aesthete podcast, host Mitch Hampton, and this is a book lunch. And there is, I should say up front that the diversity of the shows we've been doing kind of startles me a little bit. And so just think about the book. So we've covered in Book Lunch Proust, D.H. Lawrence. You know, we talked about Henry James, Portrait of a Lady. I mean, we did that series on love, and we did all these things. And even more remarkably from my point of view, is the Patti Smith show I did with Joe, my girlfriend, you know. And so one thing, and of course we did the British philosophers last month. So what a lot of those texts I just mentioned have in common is they're about prose. They're about dense, revelatory, visionary syntax in prose, and not only plotting character, but just doing things with sentences, doing things with words. Some, in the case of Proust, and remarkable things with words. In our last show, we talked about British philosophers, Iris Murdoch. Once in a while, as we started originally on our show, like to talk about coffee table books, talk about books where it's not about so much the prose or even the writing, but about a physical object in the universe. A physical object, like a record, like a book or a coffee table book. And so for a lot of the 20th century, we had, and in the early part of the 21st century, we had these things called coffee table books. And I've showed fashion books on the show before, and things like that. And this is kind of what we're going to deal with here. Now, I have to say, again, I have so many notes here that I have to consider. This episode comes to us thanks to one person who I cannot thank enough, and that's Linda Russo. Is Linda Russo out there? If she's out there, thank you, thank you, thank you. Why? Because I titled this episode Something Borrowed, and I borrowed a beautiful book from her, and I'm doing a show about the book, and then I'm going to return it to her safely. And it's an older book. Quite older, actually, because there's been many books since on the topic by both daughters, actually, I think. This is Nancy Sinatra's coffee table art book, My Father, Frank Sinatra. And we're going to look inside the book. We're going to carefully look inside some of these images. Because just as there was a world of book publishing at that time, there was a world of art and culture. And if I had to define that, definitions are always slippery, of course, even if they have truth in them. I want to sort of call it pre-rock and roll, pre-rock culture. A lot of it is jazz and African American. A lot of it, in the beginning of our subject today, this book, is the big band swing era, 1940s and 50s. And that was a long period of music. I mean, it's hard for us today to really, in a sense, make sense of the fact that we had, and this was a monoculture for a good 40 years. There were all these kinds of musics. And I include, by the way, in this bebop and progressive and sort of the instrumental stuff, because I see it as part of the same world, the same culture. even though music sounds very different, of course, than Tommy Dorsey or even Duke Ellington or Fletcher Henderson. But all that, you could call it sort of, classic, jazz or classical American popular music, show tunes and Broadway and Hollywood. So this was a kind of a one, I guess you could call it a monoculture. And Sinatra is in a way the ultimate representative of that era, because he starts in the trenches of Harry James and the Tommy Dorsey band in the 40s. They called him a boy singer. I have a recording of Frank Sinatra and the Red Norvo group in 1957. They said we added a boy singer, Frank Sinatra. And so to get a sense of my feeling about Frank Sinatra, there's a Christian McBride, the bassist, wrote an essay this month, I think, on his love for Frank Sinatra, what he learned from Sinatra, phrasing, swing time, mastery of song, mastery of melody. And all this to say is that, we often, when we think about Sinatra, we think about his personality, his charisma, his symbolic meaning for the 20th century. But for me, the most important part of Sinatra is the musician. Because if you are a musician like him, a vocalist, and I put him in the he's one of the greatest vocalists of the 20th century. So I place him alongside a Sarah Vaughan, for example, just to name one example. And all the great jazz musicians said, I learned how to play from Sinatra. Miles Davis said this, I follow Sinatra. He worked with many great jazz musicians, of course, Count Basie and Quincy Jones and all the rest of it. So it's such a big topic, but it's not really our topic of this episode, really, because this is about books and book publishing. So let's look at something very interesting. Thanks to Linda Russo. Linda Russo is wonderful. I should say something about her. She used to be a ballet dancer in New York City. She's, like me, an ex-New Yorker. And she does hair. She works in a salon in Asheville. And she's, if I had more of it, I would see her more often, but such is the case of genetics and life. But she borrowed this book from her. So I'm going to show you something really interesting. And this is actually what got me started in the idea of doing a show, more shows on coffee table books. It's not just that it's sort of a lost or dying art of physical, three-dimensional volume and mass objects, right? It's not only that, but it's also a window into the power of an era, any era. Eras have power. Eras have so much power, dictating sensibilities, styles, tones, psychological assumptions, normative assumptions, by the way, to harken back to our British episode of Right and Wrong and all the rest of it. If you have any doubt in your mind that eras are really important, not to take away from the individual sound of a Frank Sinatra and the individual vision of a Shakespeare or of Art Tatum or Miles Davis, yes, individual matters, but also, and this is an important theme on our podcast, looking at different styles in time and how those styles really dominated our lives. And today is no exception. There are new styles today. I don't know as much about them. I'm not as expert on them, but they're not. You can never say that they're not styles. So this is Linda's book. Turn it around. It's a big book. Look at this picture. This is Milton Green. Milton Green was a wonderful, wonderful photographer in those years. Frank and Nancy. There's a lot of great Philip Halsman. Do these names ring a bell? They were kind of commercial. Yeah, Milton Green. That's a whole other topic, because all the great sort of mass cultural popular photographers. Fran Lebowitz's partner, and Anne Leibowitz is one of the latest ones in that. Herb Ritz, and they're all in this book. A lot of those folks. I'm going to show you another book. I just showed you that. You have that in your mind's eye. What do we got? See? The same exact paper, not just the same coloring. Same font, same style, and even the back page is a similar photography. There's Quentin Crisp, the naked civil servant here, who wrote this book on style, the late great Quentin Crisp. And here's same kind of black and white photography. They're so identical. Both books come from the 1980s and late 70s, because if we count this Quentin Crisp book, it's published in 1981, so, you know, there's a holdover. So what do we make of this? Why the black and the gold and the white? And why so identical? Frank Sinatra's book is from Doubleday. Let's see what we have here. Information on the yeah, 1985 Doubleday, and this is from an independent publisher. To give you a sense of the power of the coffee table book, that people had tables and furniture and they would put books on the table. I found this is kind of interesting. Ooh, these are heavy. Here's a book on postmodernism by Charles Jenks. Boy, is it heavy. See? From the early 80s. Here's a book by Charles Jenks in the mid-90s, 97, 98. Look at how lightweight. Already this is communicating to the world that there's a change afoot. Moving away, maybe perhaps inching slowly away from three-dimensional art objects with volume and mass, and sort of going towards the screen, perhaps. Or maybe Charles Jenks, of course, wanted to have a summary that's more relatable to a mass audience than the other book, but I have both, which is kind of interesting. We could do a whole episode on the two Charles Jenks book and postmodernism. Any event, don't quite know how to proceed. I want to look inside Linda's book and look at some pictures and reflect on it. And so we're going to do this here. All right. There's a dedication in this book. See, Christmas, 1985, December. Merry Christmas to someone. Here's Frank in his big band 40s period, so some suggestions for listening. The movie where he sings Night and Day, black and white movie, Reveille, they talk about it in here, is incredible. Any of those Harry James Dorsey recordings, Nancy with a Laughing Face, is a must. Speaking of Nancy, he had a wife named Nancy, as well as a daughter named Nancy, so that's interesting. The Night They Called It a Day. These are some personal favorites of that period. But look at this photography. Gorgeous. Just this. There's the boy singer in the 40s, wearing a very, very, very good gray flannel suit and some kind of polka dot tie there. He's always a great dresser. Known for that. And here's, let's see what we got here. Here's what you would see if you were in a city. You would see Frankus in person in New York. Great photographs in this book. Frank Sinatra in person. Of course, his movie career. Gene Kelly. Anchors Away. The Man with the Golden Arm. I mean, it's a whole, again, it's great watching this. Now, this is interesting. It's a little bit later. This is him in the 50s. He's still wearing flannel, by the way. It's a flannel suit, but it's cut a little bit differently. It's not quite as full. Wearing a great hat there, fedora. See him in the 50s. It's, evolution of an artist, his style. I wrote an obituary piece about Frank Sinatra when I was 30. Oh God, I was 34 years old when he passed. So that, and I wrote a piece on Sinatra, and I called him the consummate musician in that piece, which he was. So, I can't go through this entire book. I wouldn't even want to, but, But here we go. And after all these, here's the publishing page. And there's Frank and his daughter. 1985, Garden City, New York, Doubleday Company. I used to, of course, have lunch at the Algonquin Hotel, and usually, not always, but sometimes sitting across from me would be Jacqueline Onassis, because the Doubleday office that she worked in was right across from that hotel. So that's a whole other story. Connections between things. So when did I first hear Sinatra as a musician? Well, I grew up with him. I grew up with pre-rock and roll culture, jazz and traditional popular song. I actually kind of, how did I wind up doing a show on Patti Smith, for example? What is that journey? Well, it's a journey. It's a long journey, and it's a journey of me growing as a person, growing as a musician, to incorporate more and various musical styles into my consciousness, into my nervous system, and expanding. But it's a slow process, and because I came to rock and roll later. And again, it's puzzling, of course, because I grew up with Sgt. Pepper. You said, well, Mitch, you listened to Sgt. Pepper as an infant, and that's true. That seemed ubiquitous, but it was only the Beatles. Everything else was jazz, Everything else was Frank Sinatra. So did I ever see Sinatra? I saw him once in Las Vegas in 1992 with Shirley MacLaine. So I got to see Sinatra. He did a tour with Shirley MacLaine. Me and my dad went to that show, and Shirley MacLaine told a lot of jokes about her brother, Warren Beatty, in that show. I remember that. That's an incredible concert. Again, the talent. I mentioned the movies and all this. Sinatra could act. He was a great actor, great singer. He understood jazz. He knew how to swing rhythmically. He knew how to groove. He understood songs. He got the best arrangers: Gordon Jenkins, Billy May, Quincy Jones, Jimmy Van Heusen, songwriters, all the rest of it. So he's a consummate musician. And so I got to see Sinatra sort of towards the end of his life in Vegas, of all places, where he was very famous because of his Count Basie at the Sands, thing from the 60s, just once. So that's kind of my personal, seeing him perform. So yeah, let's look at some things in this book. The big band was a very organized. See this? The way this setup is. See this organization with the trombones. That's the Tommy Dorsey and his brother, trombonist. It's a very interesting. We're actually now looking into this, what I call pre-rock and roll world. Pre-rock and roll world, which, I could write a whole book. If they asked me, I could write a book on what that was and meant. So it was an interesting combination in those years. So 1930s, 40s, 50s. One of the things I would say about that period that was unique to that period, and it's something to love about that period. Again, my taste is diverse. I'm into many other things. But the virtues of that period, okay, one of them is an interesting, and I don't think they thought of it this way. I think they just did it. It was just built into the style of the era. a mixture of, as I said, the highly organized, highly disciplined, highly controlled, with emotional expression, profound emotional expression. Think about the songs of that era by the Gershwins and Cole Porter. They are disciplined songs. They have craft, but they are utterly unafraid of human feeling and sentiment. They wallow in it, actually. And this is what makes it so different than when rock comes in. It's always constantly tempered by the discipline. And this, it goes to how the big bands were organized. And it's a style, Here's another color photograph from the Live at the Sands. I love this book. And also there's writing by Nancy Sinatra in here about her feelings. Sammy Davis Jr. Sinatra was not only a great musician, but he did much great in the world politically at that time. Enormous good for African Americans and for civil rights. He made a movie. He made an interesting short film. I think it's called The House I Live In, which is an attack on racism. Beautiful film, if you can see it. I'm sure it's on YouTube. There's a picture of Frank Sinatra backstage, and you just see him getting ready, and there's only one photo on the wall, and it's Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So it's an interesting era. But see what I mean by the organization? See this is thought. See, rock and roll people think this is very corny. But these are band pictures, Because in rock and roll they had band pictures, but it's a very different. If you look at the Ramones together, it doesn't look like that. It's kind of funny, the power of an era. We're in an era, We're in an era where they made 2 books with the same fonts and the same colors and glossy. It's a photo of Robert Kennedy right before his assassination in Frank Sinatra. See that? I think it's probably a fundraiser for civil rights or for probably really interesting. It's a beautiful photo of, look at this. Amazing. Boots are made for walking. That was her. Just incredible, right? The presentation. But again, that photo is kind of an example of what I'm talking about, because there's an enormous amount of preparation and work that goes into making a photo like that. But it also does express something. It's very expressive, and it's an interesting, again, that era I feel blends. It's an interesting blend of, I would call, the artificial and the natural. It's a little bit like Frank Capra, the filmmaker. He would test screen all his movies, and he would test them with basically even amounts of males and females at the time, and he would recut films if women didn't like something in his films. We want to talk about mass money to have mass appeal. There's a case to be made that Capra's movies are good for that reason, that they have a kind of, again, this culture is about universality. It's about communicating to everyone. That's why we today call it a monoculture. There's plenty in this era that we could criticize, and that I would criticize. There is much to criticize. Not perfect, but we're here in this episode discussing the era and looking at it, more positive aspects of it. Up into the 80s. Another thing about coffee table books of this era is that that organization thing. Look at that, all the albums he did. They collect them all and all the pictures. And then all the faces. Look at this. Who would have bought this book back in the 70s or 80s? Look at that. What was the audience for this book? Well, there was an audience for a book like this in 85 or 86, you know? Now, of course, all of this is on the screen, so it's not physical. It's a little more ephemeral, and you click and you see pictures. It's a little profoundly different world. I can't get into the context of this episode, an evaluation of that, because that's such a big topic, and I'm not really sure myself about that. But you know, it's these heavy coffee table books. With the pictures in them. It was of an era. So I'm not going to play any Sinatra. No music, just looking at the books. You can go, of course, to YouTube, or even if you have a record, play Live at the Sands with Basie, which is remarkable. And just one of the great jazz albums of all time, that album. Or Something Stupid with his daughter. They did that, went on tour. There's some great photographs of them on tour. Really great. It's an era. What I can do is go to my piano and play a little something to give you kind of a feeling. We're not going to play anything that's been done. No, nothing copywritten. But I am going to go over and improvise a little bit my feelings about Frank Sinatra. Little music. I hope it. Get a drink of coffee here, and just to do it. All right. Short, little something here. Let's do it. Well, that's all for now. It's kind of a different book lunch because I played piano on it. It's fun. So that was totally improvised. So that's very different than what we've been talking about. Not of course, not the language, which comes from that era, but it's different in that it's wholly improvised, and it's not a chart that's pre-written by Gordon Jenkins or Jimmy Van Heusen. It's not the same every time, It's not all written out. And it's just me improvising the feeling of loving Sinatra singing, and others. People we haven't discussed that I like as much as him. One of them hangs over my piano, Bobby Short, who I knew somewhat. Same era. But thanks for coming out. I hope you have a good weekend, serviceable weekend, maybe even a great weekend. And we have a lot of interesting shows coming up I'm excited about in finishing out April and then May. So look for us, Journey of Anesthetic Podcast. Like and subscribe to our show. There aren't too many shows out there where we're talking about Proust and Iris Murdoch and Patti Smith and Sinatra and books all on the same show. I do what I can, but thank you, and to be continued.